Most women don't lose power by being weak. They lose it by explaining too much and accepting inconsistency too long. When a woman over-explains her feelings, it rarely comes from weakness. It comes from a desire to be understood, to be fair, to make sure no one misunderstands her intentions. She believes clarity will create respect. She believes that if she explains herself well enough, calmly enough, the other person will finally see her value. But what actually happens is more subtle and far more damaging. Every extra explanation quietly trains people that her boundaries are negotiable, flexible, and open for discussion. Boundaries are meant to be felt, not defended. The moment a woman starts justifying why she feels uncomfortable, why something hurt her, or why she needs space, the power shifts. Instead of her emotional line being accepted as a fact, it becomes an argument. Instead of her boundary being a statement, it becomes a request for approval. And once people sense that approval is required, respect begins to fade. Over-explaining often sounds responsible. It sounds mature. It sounds like emotional intelligence. But emotionally intelligent people do not convince others to respect them. They expect it. When a woman explains her feelings repeatedly, she unintentionally communicates that her emotions are up for debate. She hands the other person a role they never earned: judge, evaluator, decision maker over her inner world. People who lack respect don't need more clarity. They need consequences. And consequences don't come from long explanations. They come from calm action, silence, distance, consistency. Over-explaining removes all of that leverage. It gives away the mystery. It gives away the seriousness. It teaches others that if they push long enough, she will talk herself into accepting less. Many women over-explain because they fear being seen as difficult. They fear being misunderstood. They fear conflict. So they soften their boundaries with words. They cushion them with emotional labor. They add disclaimers like, maybe I'm overreacting, or I don't want to seem dramatic, or I'm probably wrong, but each sentence like this chips away at authority. It tells the listener, you don't really have to take this seriously. And people rarely respect what isn't taken seriously by the person expressing it. When someone crosses a boundary and a woman responds with a long explanation, the focus shifts away from the behavior and onto her emotions. Now she is managing their comfort instead of protecting her standards. The other person isn't thinking, I crossed a line. They're thinking, she's emotional. And once that label is placed, power is lost. Not because she is emotional, but because she taught them to center her emotions instead of their actions. Strong boundaries are short, they are clear, they don't apologize. I'm not comfortable with that. That doesn't work for me. I won't accept that behavior. These statements don't require evidence. They don't require a backstory. They don't require a childhood explanation. The more a woman explains, the more she signals uncertainty, and uncertainty invites challenge. Over-explaining also creates a dangerous dynamic where disrespect is rewarded with attention. Someone ignores her needs, behaves inconsistently, or crosses a line, and in return they receive a detailed emotional briefing. They receive access to her thoughts, her wounds, her hopes. This teaches them that bad behavior leads to deeper connection, not distance. And people repeat what benefits them. Another hidden cost is self-betrayal. When a woman explains too much, she often talks herself out of her own intuition. She starts softening the boundary as she speaks. She begins strong, then ends with compromise. She convinces herself to stay patient, to get one more chance, to be understanding. The boundary dissolves in real time. The other person doesn't even need to push. She does it for them. Power is rooted in self-trust. Over-explaining erodes that trust. It sends a message inward that her feelings need permission, that her discomfort must be justified, that her needs are only valid if someone else agrees. Over time, this creates hesitation, second-guessing, emotional exhaustion. And people sense that. They sense when someone doesn't fully stand behind their own boundaries. Respect grows in the absence of negotiation. When a boundary is stated and enforced without drama, people adjust. When it is explained, defended, and re-explained, people test. Not because they are cruel, but because humans are wired to see how far they can go. Clear limits end that curiosity. Long explanations invite it. There is also a deeper psychological layer. Over-explaining often comes from a belief that love must be earned through emotional labor, that being accommodating makes someone valuable, that understanding others at the expense of oneself is noble. But power doesn't come from being endlessly understanding. It comes from discernment, knowing when to speak and when to stop speaking. Silence after a boundary is uncomfortable, especially for women who are taught to smooth things over. But silence is where power settles. Silence communicates finality. It tells the other person there is nothing to negotiate. Over-explaining keeps the conversation alive when it should have ended. It keeps the door open when it should have closed. When a woman stops over-explaining, something shifts. People listen more carefully. Some pull away. Some adjust. Some reveal their true intentions. That's not a loss. That's clarity. The ones who only stayed because she overfunctioned emotionally were never respecting her in the first place. Power doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't convince. It doesn't chase understanding. It states, observes, and responds. A woman who understands this doesn't need to teach others how to respect her. She lets her standards do the teaching. And when she stops over-explaining, the room feels different. Conversations change. Dynamics shift. Not because she became colder, but because she became clearer. Because she no longer hands people the script on how to cross her boundaries. Because she understands that respect is not built through emotional persuasion, but through quiet certainty, consistent action, and the willingness to let people misunderstand her if that misunderstanding costs her peace. Staying emotionally available to inconsistent behavior feels like loyalty at first. It feels patient. It feels hopeful. A woman tells herself that people go through phases, that confusion is temporary, that effort will eventually be returned. She keeps her heart open even when actions don't match words. She remains warm when responses grow cold. She stays understanding when clarity disappears. And slowly, without noticing, her power begins to slip. Inconsistency creates imbalance. One person controls the rhythm, the attention, the availability. The other adapts. When a woman continues to offer emotional access to someone who shows up only when it suits them, she teaches them that stability is optional. She communicates that her presence is guaranteed, regardless of how fragmented theirs becomes. And when presence is guaranteed, it is no longer valued. Emotionally available women are often praised. They're seen as supportive, empathetic, loving. But emotional availability without selectivity turns into self-abandonment. Power is not about withholding affection. It's about matching energy. When effort is not mirrored and access remains unchanged, the dynamic shifts from mutual to one-sided. Inconsistent behavior thrives on forgiveness without adjustment. Someone disappears, returns with excuses, gives just enough attention to keep hope alive. If a woman welcomes them back emotionally every time without requiring consistency, she reinforces the cycle. The other person never has to stabilize their behavior because instability still grants them connection. There is no cost to confusion. Consistency is a form of respect. It signals reliability, intention, and care. When a woman accepts inconsistency as normal, she lowers the standard for how she is treated. Not verbally, but energetically. She waits. She watches. She wonders. Her mind becomes occupied by someone who is not fully present, and mental occupation is a quiet loss of power. Emotionally staying open during inconsistency often means suppressing discomfort. She ignores the tension in her chest when plans fall through. She rationalizes mixed signals. She convinces herself that clarity would push them away. So she stays agreeable, calm, understanding. But inside, resentment begins to form, and resentment is a sign that a boundary has already been crossed. The person being inconsistent feels the difference. They sense that there is no urgency to change. They feel no pressure to choose, to commit, to show up fully. Why would they when partial effort still grants full access? Power doesn't erode because the other person is inconsistent. It erodes because inconsistency is tolerated emotionally. There is a difference between patience and passivity. Patience observes patterns, passivity absorbs them. When a woman stays emotionally available to inconsistency, she stops observing and starts absorbing. The unpredictability becomes normal. Her nervous system adapts to uncertainty. And once uncertainty feels familiar, stability can feel foreign. Inconsistent behavior keeps a woman in the state of anticipation, waiting for replies, waiting for clarity, waiting for effort. Anticipation pulls energy forward, away from the present, away from herself. Power exists in presence. When attention is constantly directed towards someone else's behavior, personal authority weakens. People respect what they have to be consistent for. If inconsistency leads to emotional distance, people correct themselves. If inconsistency leads to the same warmth, the same access, the same emotional availability, there is no correction, just continuation. Not because they are malicious, but because humans follow the path of least resistance. Staying emotionally available during inconsistency also distorts self-worth. A woman begins to measure her value by how much effort she can inspire, how patient she can be, how understanding she can remain. She internalizes the inconsistency as a challenge to overcome rather than a signal to step back. And when love feels like a test, power is already compromised. Emotional availability should be responsive, not constant. It should expand with consistency and contract with uncertainty. This isn't punishment, it's alignment. When behavior is unclear, emotional access should become limited, not deeper. Depth belongs where stability exists. Many women fear that pulling back emotionally is manipulative or cold, but there is nothing manipulative about protecting energy. Manipulation seeks control. Boundaries seek balance. Pulling back during inconsistency is not about teaching a lesson. It's about refusing to participate in confusion. When emotional availability is removed, clarity appears quickly. Some people step up. Some disappear. Both outcomes restore power, because power is knowing where you stand and acting accordingly, not lingering in ambiguity hoping for change. Inconsistency often survives because someone else is doing the emotional work of holding the connection together. When a woman stops doing that work alone, the true strength of the connection is revealed. And strength that depends on one person's emotional endurance was never strength to begin with. Power grows when emotional availability is intentional, when it is offered to those who show up steadily, when it is withdrawn from those who waver. This teaches others how to engage without a single explanation. Behavior meets consequence. Energy meets response. A woman does not need to announce that inconsistency is unacceptable. She doesn't need to demand change. She simply needs to stop emotionally accommodating it. When her availability matches the other person's effort, imbalance corrects itself or ends. Inconsistency loses its grip when it no longer receives reassurance. When unanswered questions are met with silence instead of anxiety. When mixed signals are met with distance instead of decoding. This is where power quietly returns. Emotional strength is not staying open at all costs. It is knowing when openness is no longer safe for self-respect. A woman who understands this does not chase clarity. She creates it through her presence or her absence. And once she stops being emotionally available to uncertainty, her energy stabilizes. Her focus returns inward, and the dynamic can no longer drain what it no longer has access to.